Hi, I'm Greg Sizemore, the founder and president of the Construction Users Roundtable, commonly called CURT. You can learn more about us at CURT.org, simply CURT.org. But we are primarily focused on the industrial construction owner and user. We share perspectives, experiences, and resources, one with the other, so we can make better, more well-informed construction decisions. We also engage our industry partners and the trades as well, because construction is hard, and together we can help work together to provide solutions to problems that matter. One of the goals of Construction Connections is to bring to you industry leaders in our space who can help you do just that. Be more well-informed, provide resources to you, and hopefully you become a better decision maker by spending some time with this podcast. And today, I am really happy to have my buddy Mike Clancy, who is a partner at FMI Corporation. FMI has been a partner of CURT for a decade, since its founding, actually. And they've been a good partner. They have served us at our conferences. They serve many of our member organizations, and they are truly a premier consulting organization. Let me tell you a little bit about Mike, my guest. So, Mike, thanks for joining us and carving out time to be with us. We're glad.
Of course.
Mike advises construction, engineering, and energy companies across the U.S. with a strong background in construction operations and strategy consulting. He brings a great viewpoint to his clients' work, and he helps them convert their strategies into operational plans that can be executed in the field. He's got a deep knowledge of estimating, capital expenditure optimization, process improvement, strategy, leadership development and training, the whole gambit, soup to nuts. He has led multidisciplinary teams within FMI and outside industry professional groups to solve complex challenges. He's nationally recognized as a speaker for associations and trade events. Early in his career, Mike held several key operational and management roles in general contracting and development firms. He's very involved in the housing market at one time throughout the southeastern part of the United States. His capabilities are many. His industry touch points are several: construction, engineering, oil and gas, renewable energies, etc. He's got a degree in construction management from our friends down there at the University of Florida, and also an MBA, also from the University of Florida. Mike, it's great to have you with us. And I want to just start off right away with a question that I think is on the minds of our listeners, and that is, after having spent a lot of time helping construction organizations and strategy development, it seems that we stumble and fall and sometimes get in the ditch when it comes to execution. Why do so many companies develop these strong, compelling, inspirational strategies and then bumble the ball at the point of execution, not getting the results that they really want? What are the key barriers? What are the problems? What are the watch-outs?
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. That's a great question. The thing about strategy is it says easy and does hard, right? Like it is great to do a lot of research and get the key team together and put together a plan and have a bunch of stage gates that we want to accomplish as an organization over the next 3 to 5 years. But then we all have to go back to work on Monday, and we all have to go and execute projects, and nobody has as their sole reason for being making sure that we actually get this stuff done. And everybody who's listening and watching will be aware, this industry is really about the tyranny of the urgent more than anything. We are so often reacting, so often putting out fires, so often dealing with both good and bad that kind of comes up in an unpredictable way. A client opportunity that we weren't expecting, and now we have to have all hands on deck to develop it. A situation in the field that requires executive oversight. And so what happens is we lose sight of things that are going to be a longer fuse, that are going to take 3 to 5 years to develop. The other issue is you may not have a weak strategy, but you may have a strategy that was never translated into resource allocation decisions, right? One of the reasons that I left working in the industry and went and got an education in the business side of the industry and have focused on that is that's a real gap and a real challenge for a lot of folks to think about it. How do we allocate the time, the talent, the money that we have as an organization to get the biggest return, and that return may be in the future. And so very often it's the pain of right now sort of superseding the investments we need to make. Most contractors are setting strategic direction at this leadership level, and then they're handing the execution back to an organization that's built to do exactly what it already does, right? You cannot execute a new strategy through an old operating model. And so
Good.
yeah, I think the firms that do this really well, they do maybe two things better than most, right? Number one, they connect those strategic priorities directly to capital allocation and resource decisions. And then number two, they hold an individual accountable for outcomes, not just for the activities.
Wow, that is terrific. So, number one, leadership team development of a conspiring strategy does not always equal field execution.
Yeah.
Number two, you got to allocate time, talent, and treasure with your highest ROI elements not done. Number three, there's got to be accountability, and a person who's just not accountable for the process, but for the end result, a person or a team. And then the fourth thing I heard you say is that oftentimes there are interruptions, the unexpected, that divert resources from the execution strategy to the pants on fire issue right now. Those seem to be the biggest. Now, let me ask a related question, kind of counterfactual theory. If you only had limited time, talent, treasure to address one of those key issues, which of those barriers, which of those watchouts, those red flags gets us the greatest ROI if we have limited resources to address it? And maybe there's others that come to mind that you didn't mention a moment ago.
I I think it's a balance, Greg, of two factors. The first factor is prioritization, right?
Mhm.
When I started at FMI, we used to do something called a value driver scorecard, which was a way to kind of assess a business across 144 or 146 different dimensions. Um, Fantastic to understand all the places that you're not as good as you could be, but how do you choose the places that you invest your time and your focus? And so if everything's important, nothing is. And most contractors in particular, they try to do too much. They try to bite off too many strategic initiatives, and it's more than they can chew. I think that's part A is we've got to have a really thoughtful mechanism for prioritization. We can talk further about what some of those are, but we've got to be thinking about this from the standpoint of what's most important, what's going to be the biggest needle movers for our organization. Part B of that, though, is you can't plan everything, right? And
Right.
so, as I already mentioned, stuff just comes up. So again, when I started at FMI, we would build these 5-year strategic plans that had initiatives. 3.5 years from now, we're going to do this. Then I lived through the Great Recession, right? And so what we found is you've got to bake flexibility and the ability to bend and move with the market dynamics into whatever you're doing. So it's a mix of prioritization and flexibility. If you have those two things in place, when the urgent pops up, one, you remember what it is that's most important that we need to focus on, the two or three things as an organization that are really going to drive us for the next, several years. And then two, you've baked enough flexibility in that you can shift if the market provides attractive new opportunities in one area or closes off options in another. You're not tied down. You haven't over indexed in any one particular area.
Does size matter? The size of the company matter? The larger the company, the more I'm making this up. So this is not an
No.
assertion nor a fact, but you know, The larger ships harder to turn versus the smaller, nimble one. Where do FMI services work best? What is your key target market area for helping those companies achieve an inspiring strategy and an effective execution?
Size matters in some regard, Greg. So there are natural evolutionary points in any contractor's life cycle where they're going to hit a threshold where, that first threshold is when we move from being able to the owner, the founder, the CEO, being able to see deeply into every project and
Mm.
know exactly what's going on. And there's a maximum size of an organization that you can do that. And then that introduces a break point where you have to start building a team and um, being able to trust other people to run parts of the business. And a lot of contractors never make it past that initial point. Think for a GC, that's maybe let's call it 100 to 150 million dollars. Think for a specialty trade contractor, that might be $50 million. You get to this place where you can no longer see everything from your seat. You have to empower other people to do that. That's the first break point. The second break point maybe happens at a larger scale where you start to get to a place where each of those subsidiary leaders have to build their own pier, right? And they can no longer see into every aspect of what they're overseeing and build the systems and processes and talent to drive that. And that's another level. And then beyond that, it starts to get into the place where at a certain size, new strategic options open up to you, right? So you get to a certain size and your ability to manage risk becomes a big driver of your profitability, more so than your ability or equally as much as your ability to execute the projects. These different capabilities come in at different points in the life cycle of a contractor. And so you asked where do we plug in the most? I think we generally work more with the mid-size and large firms out there. With the large firms, we're an advisor. With the mid-size firms, we're often the advisor. And I think that's important. I think there's an old book that says something about in the multitude of counselors, there's wisdom. I
Uh,
tend I tend to agree with that. I think once you get to a place where you can no longer see every aspect of your business from your chair, it's time to start thinking about who do you trust to give you advice on that. And that's usually where we connect with folks. And then very often with the very largest firms in the industry, we're one of many tools in their toolkit. And that's okay too. We like to partner with everybody who is trying to make this a better industry.
yeah, and you folks do a great job. So help us understand FMI better. What if if the listener has been intrigued by the first 10, 12 minutes of our time together here, what other things does FMI do in addition to what you've described that the contract construction industry finds valuable? Take a minute or two and educate us on the high value, high impact services of FMI.
Well, thanks for allowing me to do the commercial, Greg. I appreciate it. FMI is really two major businesses that are better together, we think. So we have our partners on our investment banking side that help firms in the industry who are making the important strategic decision to do an acquisition or to sell their business or to maybe institute an ESOP or what have you. Um, and that part of the business it's very much focused on the financial side of our industry, the capital allocation side of our industry. And then within our consulting business, what our emphasis is on providing solutions to problems that an organization is running into for the first time in its life. Um, Very often, those are challenges that originally bubble up in a project execution standpoint. We realize, wow, we don't have great processes, we don't have great developmental pathways, we don't really, we're losing people to better compensation, and we don't understand what we should be paying. Um, these are all areas where our performance consulting practice can come in and support. Sometimes it's my team. I lead our strategy consulting practice. And, it's, hey, we really want to expand into this new geography or tackle this new type of client. but we don't really understand it as well as we think we ought to. Or we just want to have a plan for how we're going to grow our business, how we're going to improve profitability, how we're going to deal with a succession challenge in the future. We help people build those plans, think about how they're going to pursue work differently, things like that. And then we've
And
got a whole emphasis on talent too. Our leadership and org development practice, our training institute, these help answer the question of how do we how do we become an attractive or remain an attractive employer in an industry where we've been talent constrained for 50 years? And that, I think, is what that team does especially well. So we try to be the provider of almost any solution that a contractor will need during their life cycle. And then we do that for other parts of the industry as well, for building product manufacturers, construction material suppliers, energy and power firms, and the like.
fascinating. Now, you mentioned the word leadership development.
Yeah.
What are the critical leadership skills that the market is dying to have? Maybe it's not. Maybe they need it and you see it from your perspective, but the demand's not there. Talk to us a little bit about the critical importance of leadership development throughout the organization. What do they need today? What are they not aware that they need today? They being, the industry stakeholders.
Well, I think we are very good as an industry at providing people with new challenges and new opportunities. What we aren't always good at is making sure they have the tools to be successful before they step into those new challenges and new opportunities. And so I think, when I look at really talented leaders in our industry, they share a few key themes. I think one is they're genuinely curious about their own business, right? They're willing to question everything. They are willing to interrogate everything. The phrase, "that's how we've always done it," never enters their vernacular. I think that's incredibly important. I'm working with a client here in Houston right now who, he's developed multiple pages of just the organizing philosophy of the business he's trying to grow and build into. And really what is going to define them and why that's different from his peers and competitors. So I think that's a big one. I think a close second is just the willingness to make decisions under uncertainty and still own the outcome. We will never have perfect information.
That's right.
My team does a ton of research and tries to deeply understand the market, and that gets you to a certain extent, and then you have to take a risk, and it has to be a calculated risk, but you've got to own that. And I think we're really good at taking risks in our industry. We're not always good at those being calculated risks, right? Almost all the best leaders I work with are really intentional about talent. And when I say that, I don't mean just hiring and getting a bunch of bodies in the door. I mean who's developing, who's ready for what gaps exist 2 levels below them. If I walked out of here tomorrow, who are the 3 people that could step into my chair and what would it take? And that's huge. And then the last one is probably the most underappreciated is the ability to hold a long time horizon. Most of us are thinking in terms of project durations or 3 to 5 years. I've actually really enjoyed, I've had the opportunity to work with several Japanese owned firms over the last half a dozen years or so of my career. They think in 25 to 50-year horizons. What is this
Yeah.
business going to look like 2 generations from now? And what are the decisions that we have to make today to keep as many options open in the future as possible? Those are kind of the big ones that I think, in terms of leadership characteristics of really outstanding organizations, it's that it's that being curious about your business. It's that willingness to make tough decisions under uncertainty. It's being really intentional about people and developing them. And then it's having a long-term view of the industry and of their organization.
Yeah, that is so true. You mentioned the future, etc. AI. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
There are no 2 more powerful letters in the alphabet these days than AI. Some refer to it as augmented intelligence.
Yeah.
Some refer to it as artificial intelligence. It has become a disruptor and a major one. How do you see the use of AI in your practice and in this industry?
Yeah, this is something that we've been wrestling with internally and making sure that we are out in front on from the standpoint of our business, because it's going to be incredibly disruptive to the advisory business. AI is absolutely compressing the amount of time it takes to do research and synthesis and scenario modeling, kind of all the things that I do in my business, right? So,
Right.
in that regard, it is a threat and an opportunity, right? It is a threat from the standpoint of it's democratizing data and it's democratizing strategic thinking, but it is not yet to a place to where it can replace judgment about what are the big questions we need to ask? How is this going to play out with the organizational dynamics that we have? Is really doing for my business is raising the floor on the quality of analysis. And I'm excited about that because it means that every time a contractor works with an advisor, they should expect the A game and they should get the A game. And we think that, I mean, candidly, we think that works really well for us. I think for our contractor clients, the opportunities in applying AI to the parts of the business that have historically been data poor, right? And you think of the big ones that really can show up in the financial statements, it's things like estimating, like cost to complete tracking, fleet utilization. Most organizations have a ton of data around this, but no insight or clarity into how to use it to make better decisions. And I think that's where AI is going to show up first. I think for our contractors that are listening, the challenge that kind of pairs with that opportunity, the risk that pairs with that opportunity is a lot of the things that will get sort of AI'd away first are things like shop drawing and submittal review, RFI management, all of the things, by the way, that an entry level project engineer has historically done. And so what we may do is hire fewer young, talented people. And that's going to be a problem 7 years down the road when we need senior project managers. And so the best firms, the ones that are thinking about AI in the right way, are looking for ways to use their data to empower people, not to replace people necessarily.
Right.
I think we're over focused on cost reduction in this industry. And as I've shared with all of my clients, I've never met one who has saved their way to success, right? It's about where you invest. And so still hire bright young people, but get them out of the trailer and onto the job site and get them out of the office looking at documents. Let AI do that and get them out on the project looking for ways to optimize what we're currently doing.
No, that's a great point. And around the CURT organization, we're thinking of it in terms of augmented human intelligence, not artificial anything, real intelligence, augmented human intelligence. And this might be a good time to introduce our listeners to our AI platform, Commodore, and we've got the CURT Solutions portal about a year ago. We saw an opportunity, and you go to how many conferences, Mike, and you see guys in the audience and gals in the audience taking pictures of PowerPoints or slide sets, and we began to do a little research on it, and the vast majority of that is never used again.
Yeah.
And certainly when you return to the office or return to the field and you go, I heard something about that. Who was that guy? And blah, blah, blah. And so the research, if you're digging for it, it takes a long time, but most people never use past that conference. So what CURT has done is over the last 5 years, we've taken every benchmarking survey, every owner's blueprint, every white paper, every magazine article, every conference presentation, every panel discussion, every PowerPoint we've ever showed anywhere, and we've put it into what today is called the CURT Solutions Portal. And that CURT Solutions Portal, think of it as a consultant like FMI in your pocket, but brings the CURT body of knowledge to our CURT members. And it's free to our CURT members. And if you're interested in learning more about the CURT Solutions Portal, just call our office, go to the website, ask for a demo. We'll be happy to show you how it works and what it does and what it has. It doesn't hallucinate. Everything's traceable. It's multilingual. And it also, we've put all the OSHA regulations into the thing. So if you're asking a safety related question, it will bring you up the CURT data that's traceable, and it also bring you the relevant OSHA regulation that helps to answer your question. So it's a good resource. It helps bring all that knowledge to a usable form when you really need it, where you really need it. So again, it's called the CURT Solutions Portal, powered by Commodore, and it's free to all CURT members and their organizations. And Mike, it's probably a conversation we ought to have offline here about how we could work together with Evan Mind to do something. I don't know.
You know,
Pretty powerful man.
you lay out that CURT Solutions portal is an exact example of what I'm talking about in terms of the democratization of data, right? Your large member contractors, the biggest firms out there, they probably have someone internally who is doing all of that. What you've
Right.
now enabled is the mid-sized firms to compete toe to toe. That democratization of data is going to be the real defining characteristic of this AI wave, right? Is the ability to access things that are publicly available, but would take a lot of lift and research to
You
find.
got it.
Yeah. So it's
That's
going to
it.
be huge.
Yeah, that's the problem we're seeking to solve. We're looking for partners. We're always on the lookout for other folks that might be interested in asking the what if questions. And so that conversation will continue at a later time. Operational improvement. You've worked extensively in improving the operations of an organization. And you may have answered this a few minutes ago, but what are the biggest inefficiencies you see in the industry that they could be low hanging fruit for us to address? Comment on that. Low hanging inefficiencies, like this would be easy to correct. This has high value and low impact on the cost and the effort it takes to correct. We're just not paying attention to it.
Yeah. I mean,
Thoughts?
we've been talking about execution capability for decades. Um, and our consultants who work with labor intensive contractors in particular, what they really focus on is driving systems and processes that are consistent. So a lot of organizations, they become successful because of great people and talented folks
Yes.
who really know the business and understand it
Right.
deeply and are able to get it done. That's not scalable, right? Great people are not scalable. There's a limited number of A players out there. The challenge becomes as you grow, because folks who do good work always get the opportunity to grow. As you grow, how do you take someone who's maybe slightly less talented than who you've got and make them successful? And this is where, sort of having consistent processes built not on broad industry best practices, but on what our business does best and differently that gives us a source of competitive advantage. Having processes that are tailored to our specific people and their capabilities and handle most of the challenges they're going to run into, that's a big driver of operational success. The other is just the decision making structure above the field. We run into a lot of organizations where everybody's managing two levels down. The folks in the field are not empowered to do things. They don't know what the limits of their empowerment are. Maybe we've told them they can make decisions, but we haven't given them the guardrails within which they can make those decisions. And speed is a competitive advantage in construction. I have, well, not never, but I rarely run into owners and end users who say, you know what, take all the time you need, right? It is okay. Take all the time you need. The real
Ain't gonna
answer,
happen ever.
the answer that we usually hear, what they say is, take the minimum amount of time it takes to get it right, but it's usually actually they want it faster than that even. And so
That's right.
the more we can build governance systems and processes that people understand where the limits of their authority are and where they actually need to bubble things up. And then we've also created the benchmarks, the dashboards, the managerial tools that you can get immediate line of sight on problems that come up. Like those two things in tandem make operations a lot easier, might be a strong word, but they make it a lot more fun, certainly.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. You have a couple of kids. We talked a little bit before the show started about, you know, the next gen, if you will, requirements are you seeing with leadership development, new entrants, etc.? Talk to us a little bit about that. I find it intriguing.
So it's always dangerous to talk broadly in generalizations, but I'm going to do it anyway. I have had the advantage over the last 5 or 6 years that I've been in my current role to really see our focus on bringing on young talent and see what's different about the 22 to 28-year-olds that are kind of early in their career versus, I'm a Generation Xer. Uh, I think what we often find is we assume that what motivates us as leaders is what's going to motivate the people that we're bringing into the organization today. And my generation in particular, very much focused on individual accomplishment, merit, eat what you kill. Like that's the mindset of Gen Xers. And that is actually how a lot of our industry thinks about development, about compensation, about rewards, all those sorts of things. And you have a generation coming into the industry that is much less interested in competing with their peers and colleagues, and much more interested in finding ways to collaborate, to build teams, to work together to achieve something bigger. They also candidly are a little bit more rational when it comes to how much time they want to give to things and where they want to spend their time. I remember my first job on a construction site. After graduating with a degree in construction management, I showed up out on the job site, and my boss handed me a broom and said, "I want you to start upstairs and sweep everything. And when you're done in this building, I want you to go on to the next building and the next one after that." And for 3 weeks, I swept and cleaned up behind subcontractors. And you try to do that with a young person today, they're going to ask why. And I didn't ask why. I just did what I was told.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not asking why because they don't respect you. They're not asking. And what I didn't realize at the time was I was learning a lot. I was learning which subcontractors clean up well after themselves, who leaves their materials all over the place, who's not working safely, who respects the project versus who doesn't, who's understaffing the job. I picked up all that by being in the room. They also saw that I was someone they could approach and talk to. I think you have to have that conversation. If someone shows up on your job site with a construction management degree and you hand them a broom, you have to tell them the why. And they're probably going to come up with other ways they could get those same skills. And we have to be open to that. I tell my clients all the time, don't judge people based on doing it the way you would have done it. Judge them on getting the outcomes you wanted to get. And that's where I think we really can unlock a lot more intergenerational collaboration and get rid of some of this noise around such and such generation doesn't have a work ethic or whatever. I have young people in my house. They work very, very hard, but they work differently, and that's okay.
Very good answer. So many golden nuggets of truth and information and inspiration in our conversation today, Mike. I just want to point that out. It's truly enjoyable to share with you. Looking ahead 5 to 10 years, what do you think is going to separate our industry's top performing contractors from the rest of the bunch?
Well, I think we've been talking for a long time about execution and being able to execute. And I think we're at the point where most good performers no longer, they're no longer differentiated based on how well they execute, right? At a certain level, everybody's going to get the job done. The next
Mhm.
thing that's going to separate people is thinking about the business more like a business, making decisions based on sort of clear-eyed capital allocation judgments. I've recently, over the last 4 or 5 years, spent a lot of time working with fleet-intensive organizations, and historically we would buy everything that we could conceivably need because most of our businesses were founder owned or family owned, and we didn't have to worry about the cost of capital. Well, as more capital enters our industry, as the private equity investment in the built environment continues to grow, as more multinationals that from overseas enter our industry to to build more, to take advantage of the manufacturing and the AI boom and the energy boom here, what have you. Those who make really clear-eyed decisions about how to allocate capital are going to be most effective. And that's not just on things like, buying yellow iron. It's also in decisions like what markets we enter. It's in decisions like what projects we pursue. It's amazing to me after, almost 20 years consulting to this industry, and after starting early in my career as an estimator, how few people actually understand what it costs to pursue something. And you're making a capital allocation decision at that point when you choose to pursue a project, when you choose to pursue a client. And if you haven't got the data to tell you whether or not you're getting a return on that investment, if you're not making decisions based on which of those are going to be the highest yield decisions, you're going to get passed by the firms who do think about their business as a business.
Wow, that is so important. Speaking of markets, where do you see the emerging markets? Obviously, data centers gets a lot of press, a lot of attention. Nobody even knew what that was 20 years ago and what they did, not certainly not the extent today. You mentioned the foreign influences. It seems like every time president gets on the airplane, it comes back. He's got billions and billions of dollars worth of deals. That means new construction, and we're already in a worker shortage. Where do you and your organization see markets emerging in the next 3 years? It's impossible to look out far.
Yeah.
Comment about emerging or existing markets that are really positioned for growth.
Well, I think it's undeniable that we are in a little bit of a bubble. We've got a little bit of an exuberance around AI and data.
Right.
That said, it's a bubble that is unlikely. It's extremely unlikely to pop in the next 3 years, and it probably has 5 to 7 years of legs in front of it. If you just look at how starved for capacity we are and where the investment is coming, there's legs to that industry. But if you're not in it today, you're probably not going to get in it quickly enough to capitalize on all the outcomes that are out there. But there are other portions of our industry that are right behind it. So you look at, depending on when this podcast drops, we will either have just dropped or have very recently dropped our inaugural energy and power overview. The energy and power market is one that is ripe for a similar run up as we've seen in the data center space. Not just because of data centers, although they are certainly energy hogs and require a lot of lift, but because of the re-onshoring of manufacturing, which is another market that we think has tremendous long-term potential. But, the age of our grid and all that sort of stuff. So energy and power will be huge. Advanced manufacturing in particular will be huge. I don't think that means a ton more manufacturing jobs, because a lot of these factories of the future are going to be less labor intensive. That's actually why they're coming back, right? If your biggest cost historically was labor, you were incentivized to build your factory where labor is cheap. If labor has fallen out of the biggest cost position and the new biggest cost position is energy and transportation, you want to be where there's a plentiful supply of energy and where you're close to the consumer. And that is the underpinning for manufacturing coming back. Obviously, tariff policy also drives some of that manufacturing investment, but not all of it. I mean, there are really good fundamental financial reasons to build manufacturing in the US. And I think we'll see a lot more of that. Beyond that, it really starts to be a geographic story. So you will see certain geographies where, for example, multifamily construction comes back sooner than in others. You will see certain geographies where there's a lot more medical investment. That's going to be around big medical and life sciences hubs. It really becomes a geographic story after those main three kind of big drivers, right? Of data and AI, of advanced manufacturing and energy and power. And then beyond that, it's heavily a local or regional geographic play.
I would agree 100%. What question or did you think I would ask Mike that we haven't gotten around to yet? Maybe you were prepared to give a good swing at the pitch. Is there a question that I haven't asked that you were quite sure that I would?
I mean, I really thought we would talk about labor shortages, and I'm glad we didn't, Greg, because everybody always asks me for a silver bullet. And the
There
fact
is.
is, one of my partners, Jay Bowman, he threw out the controversial line at a speech one time that we don't have a skilled labor problem in the construction industry. Everyone was taken aback and set on their heels. And the immediate follow up was, we've had a skilled labor shortage for 50 years in this industry. At this point, we can no longer pretend it's a problem that has a solution. Instead, we need to change our thinking to say a structural limitation of our industry is that we will never have enough skilled labor. And so the best firms need to have a whole suite of solutions to that problem, including things like prefabrication and offsite manufacturing, including things like internal talent development and internal labor pool development systems and mechanisms, including thoughtful compensation practices. All of these things, you have to have a whole suite of solutions in order to mitigate what is a fundamental gap in our industry that seems like it will always be with us. Labor shortages will always be with us. I'm glad you didn't ask me about it because I don't have silver bullet. What I would say is you've got to be throwing every solution you can think of at this and doing it faster and with more flexibility than your peers. But we're not going to solve it, certainly not on this podcast, but I don't see us solving it. I do see some great trends. I do see a lot more young people, particularly young men, considering the trades rather than going
Yeah.
direct to college. I think COVID
Right.
helped in that. I think, some of the challenges with student debt have helped in that. As I shared before we started recording, Greg, my own 15-year-old wants to go in the trades. I
Yeah.
fully support that with some caveats. So, I think we are seeing some great trends in that direction, but it's not fast enough and it won't be enough. We have to look at every solution available to us.
So you've mentioned, I just want to touch, you mentioned some creative solutions like modularization and pre-assembly, internal leadership development, retention, thoughtful compensation packages. What others? Let's just spend 30, 45 seconds. Are there two or three others that our listeners should be considering when we're talking about the inevitable, long-term, ubiquitous, never-ending workforce shortage challenge in our business, both in the field and in the management and executive areas? Are there some other issue? What's the word I want to use? Are there some other elements? There it is, that our listeners ought to be thinking about in addition to those three or four you mentioned?
I think the biggest one is not truly understanding the cost of turnover. There is a retention issue in our industry that just doesn't get enough airtime. It's almost apocryphal at this point for people to say, uh, a worker in the field, a carpenter, a machine, a heavy equipment operator, a sheet metal worker is likely to leave for $2 more an hour somewhere else. They don't fully understand all the benefits, whatever. We're not doing a great job of articulating reasons to stay. And we're generally only looking at our compensation and making sure it makes sense in the aftermath of a bunch of people leaving. There are certainly cases of folks dramatically overpaying for talent where you couldn't possibly get there, but most of the people who leave aren't leaving your organization over money, or at least that's not why they're open to leave. They're always going to make more money somewhere else, otherwise they wouldn't leave. But they're open to leaving, and this is backed up by studies and data. They're open to leaving, and they're open to having the conversation for mainly three key reasons that we have to solve for. The first is I don't like and don't get along with the people that I work with. If you aren't happy at work because you don't get along with folks, then you're going to be open to leaving. The second is I have a problem with my boss. They don't appreciate me. I don't respect them. Whatever. Those interpersonal dynamics, the manager managee relationship is another driver of why someone's open to look. But the third and kind of the most insidious, and this happens at all levels of talent, is I don't see an attractive path for myself in this organization. And so, how do we tell people about the paths that are available to them, show them what that looks like, give them a plan for development towards one of those paths that they can really kind of sink their teeth into, so that they're not tempted, so that they're not even looking, because the cost of losing a person is much, much more than what you have to pay to get that next person in the door.
Oh yeah.
It's the 3 to 6 to 12 months sometimes of wind up it takes. It's the fact that when people leave during a project, that project invariably underperforms from a profitability standpoint. All these things, if we're not out ahead of that and solving those problems before they arise, we're creating our own talent problem.
That's an interesting one to leave on, but a very thoughtful and provocative one. So we'll just kind of leave it right there. Hey, gang, we've been talking to Mike Clancy, a partner at FMI, a long-term friend of the Construction Users Roundtable. And I started taking notes on some of the things you said, Mike. I don't know if our business, it's everywhere. It's black and blue ink all over the page. I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights and perspectives and resources. What we do here at CURT, and you have been very generous on all three elements. Thank you for that, Mike.
It's been my pleasure, Greg. Thank you for having me.
It's been great to have you. And you've been listening to Construction Connections, powered by CURT, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.